All right. Hello, Simon, and hello to everybody who's already with us.
How are you, Nina?
Quite well, and yourself?
Thank you. Pretty good.
Hopefully, sometime soon we'll be able to do this in the same room with the same camera. But
Yes,
for now,
exactly. This is this is what I thought this morning. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
cool.
Hello.
So as we, go ahead.
No, just want to say also hello from my side to everybody.
So I see there is a couple of people that have contacted us that also I've been speaking with on LinkedIn the last couple of days. And welcome to everybody. We'll just give it about another minute or so before we dive into things, just until everybody has time to actually log in and for everything to work out. But I see the number is raising already, so I think we're in a good way. Let's give it until 5:01 and then German style we start.
Yes. So German style, we start now, right?
We should have started a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
True, true. All right, should be hit it off already, I would say.
Yes.
Cool, great. So as I mentioned before, welcome to everybody who is already with us here live. Really nice to welcome a couple of you who were with us last week as well. And of course, to all the new ones, great to have you here. As always, we start with a couple of housekeeping things. If you have questions, if you have anything of interest or comments that you feel are worthy for us to also pick up during the webinar, feel free to use the question or the chat option. We'll be reviewing it throughout the webinar, and we'll make sure to cover as many topics as possible and answer to more or less all of them. If you don't feel like writing in the chat, feel free to reach out to us either on LinkedIn, like some of you already did, or via email, which we will share at the end of the webinar too. From the introduction side, the same as the last couple of weeks, Nina, from my side, I'm responsible for the sales development topics at Building Greater. And next to me here, Simon, our data analyst in-house, and about another 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 functions. So give a short intro of yourself as well, better than I.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so mainly I'm working in customer success with our customers on specific data and also on the aggregated data analysis side. Yeah, hello from my side.
Awesome, thank you. So just to review kind of how this looks as every week, I'll just do a short intro on Building Radar. I'm assuming most of you have heard this before already, so I'll keep it short, and then we'll dive into the agenda and further on throughout the points. So on Building Radar side, basically, I say the same every week. Why this data? Why are we the relevant ones to speak about it? And the reason is we are an artificial intelligence based technology platform that reads through all of the available public data. So from public tenders to just about anything that's openly available information, such as news articles, such as any kind of announcement, community announcement, and similar. We're able to read millions of these articles with artificial intelligence and actually process them in German and English language so far. And based on that, we are publishing data on our platform. And in this case, for the webinar, we're also able to review all of that data and actually tell you, what does the market look like? Are things going better? Are they not? In which market is it different? So this is really what we want to focus on this week. I'll hand it over to you, Simon, for the agenda.
Thank you very much. And this is exactly what we do also this week. We have updates on the graphs and the data we analyzed also already a few weeks ago. So we see a weekly update for numbers for Europe, DACH, and also the US. As a second main part this week, this is comes from a customer or a potential customer request that we're looking into data of structural and civil engineering. So this would be Hoch- und Tiefbau in German. And as third point, also from a customer request, a look on more worldwide construction data.
And
so let's
with
start
exactly what you heard from Simon's side, basically, we really do want to make sure that we're covering what's of interest to you. So if you're seeing something that we can dive deeper into or cover different topics, please do reach out to us, and we'll try to cover that in the following weeks.
Yes, exactly. So most of the graphs we see this week comes from customers or potential customers or whoever is interested in requests. Except this slide, we have this slide from the pretty beginning, and this was the starting point of our webcast series. Starting point was also the Corona crisis in Europe. So at the time when the Corona crisis hit Europe, in Italy, in calendar week 8, with the lockdown in northern Italy, we ask ourselves, can we show any data? Can we analyze any data for the construction sector, which shows a significant, a serious connection to this social development with the Corona situation? And what we started with is this graph. So we had a look on our early stage information for Europe, and we saw that we have a significant or more than significant decrease, collapse of our early stage construction data from calendar week 10 to calendar week 12 of minus 55%. This is what we call the Corona effect for our construction data, right? And since then, we see a slight or modest recovery since calendar week 12, when the German Chancellor Merkel had her famous TV speech, where basically the lockdown in Germany started, or kind of started. I remember that I think most of our company, right, was in a home office since this week at the latest.
That's true.
So what we see after this Corona effect for the early stage information, we see a recovery of the data on the construction sector in Europe of plus 18% in the last 4 weeks, except this little decrease of 10% since last week. We, on average, we see this plus of 18% for Europe, and this is what we also see for DACH, but times 2. So we see a increase of 36% in the early stage information for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland since the lowest ever point since Corona.
Yeah, and here, I mean, I would like to also add that when we're looking this difference between Europe and Germany, you can see quite a, like you said, also double the recovery on the German side, or German speaking regions at least, so Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. And if we think about also what's happening around Europe versus what's happening in Germany, so the recovery from the crisis is also more or less on the way, whereas when we're reviewing France, UK, Italy, that's where the drop is still quite large, and I think this can be a quite logic way, let's say, to review this data and to pull some conclusions out of it.
Yeah, maybe also as explanation for the ones who listen for the first time today, what we cover here are planned or active construction projects, so data on active construction projects, and this is why we use this as indicator for the construction sector, and now as connection to the coronavirus.
Yeah, definitely.
Next slide is a little bit more in detail for the DACH region in terms of private and public projects. So we have our peer groups for the private projects and the public projects, and what we see here for 2020 is again a Corona effect until calendar week 12 at least. And the main insight is that the data on the public projects recover much faster than the data on the private projects. So
yeah,
you see
here it's also, I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I just wanted to see this is also quite a, like, let's say it makes sense when we also again comparing to what's happening around, and let's say, okay, in terms of public projects, these are rather kind of governmental investments and similar, whereas public is a company would need to be comfortable enough to make these investments, to make these contributions. And this is for me going to be interesting in the future to see also how far is this going to recover in the next couple of weeks. Like, are we really going to see a lot more investors and owners being really willing to say, okay, we're ready to make new investments at this time point?
Yes, that's true. This is also what I heard from customer parts, that there is a strong belief in the public sector, not only for this year but also for next year. So construction projects are ongoing, and so the feeling at the moment is that this development that the public sector recovers faster probably will last for at least several months, if not longer. But this would be the this just looking into the future. Nobody can say something for sure, but what we can say for sure is how the development for these peer groups look like in 2019, and you clearly see, going back to 2020, that there is or what the comparison with 2019 shows, that is more like a proof for this corona effect in 2020, right? Because in 2019 the development was more or less the same, of course on another level, but the increases and decreases were the same, more or less.
And just for explanation also for our listeners generally, you can see we're calling this a corona effect. The reason being, normally in the past years we've seen this Easter effect, so things drop around the Easter time period, especially in the DACH region. And then when we're comparing the extra numbers of 2020, we're at the point of Easter, we're already, like, let's call it in this recovery phase, and the drop was a lot earlier. So the Easter wasn't felt as much as the actual corona was. And that's why we'll continue to refer to it as a corona effect.
Additionally, I can say from the German webcast we had just before at 4 o'clock, from a listener's comment was that, or the question was, and this is something we do not do normally, but I go back to this slide. The question was regarding this drop of 10%, if the national holiday last Friday maybe influenced this development. And this is in the same line as Nina explained with the Easter drop. Of course, if there is a national holiday or two in 1 week, this can influence the data, because of course we rely also on publications, online publications, which are lower in holiday times. Next slide is from my side pretty interesting, because we see a direct comparison of the development in US market and the DACH region, again Germany, Austria and Switzerland. Two things we
give it a
see
moment, Simon. For me the slide didn't change yet. Can you check that out once again? Yeah, there we go.
Okay, I'm on slide 9 now, right? So last week or the week before, we already saw that the decrease started, or the breaking point in the US and DACH region was, there was a difference of 2 weeks. So the decrease in the US started 2 weeks later than in DACH region. And what we calculated now, pretty simple calculation, but effective, is that the total value, or the total level of data for DACH is at shortly above 50% of the pre-crisis level of calendar week 7, and almost 10% higher in the US. So we only had 40% decrease for the US and almost 50% decrease for the DACH region.
Here, I'm really interested, especially with the faster kind of decision making that happens in the US if we're going to see a spike in recovery, like we've seen a spike in actual kind of this breaking point, like you were mentioning, because the break happens a lot faster in the US than what we're seeing in Europe.
The break happens a lot faster. The recovery is also faster. What's the big question is, will there be, and when will there be a second lockdown? So hopefully not. But if decreases, if number of corona infections will decrease, nobody can exclude a second lockdown. So this would of course be not so good, not for the construction sector, not for our data.
On the data
so
side,
fingers crossed, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. All right, let's move.
But what I want to say is that, that this is so this is second part, right? The slide changed now, Nina? Perfect. Yep. So the second main part is a comparison of structural and civil engineering data. And what we see here is the development of a peer group for structural engineering. So this would be Hochbau in German, and civil engineering would be Tiefbau in German. Since the start of the year, we see this seasonal sharp increase of the data until, again, calendar week 7. So we have the same peak for these two peer groups. We see a sharp decrease of the structural engineering works. We cannot see this pretty clearly in the data for the civil engineering work, so this would be Tiefbau. But if we again calculate the numbers, we see that we have a decrease for both segments, but a significant difference in the level of the, or in the height of the decrease. So we are at 43% compared to the pre-crisis level. This means we have almost 60% decrease in the structural engineering and just 35% decrease in the civil engineering.
And so just to make this clear, also when we're talking about this civil, which also makes sense, then we're talking, of course, roads and similar. And I guess when I go around the city, I can see that this is quite a realistic thing to say as well. There are still some projects going on, and I'm sure there has been things that were stopped. But for me, from what I'm seeing in the city, it's right on the spot.
Yeah, in the next slides, we will see how these peer groups are constructed. So this will not this slide. This is again a look back into 2019 as comparison to the current data, so that we have a comparison. And what we see here is again a more or less constant development of the civil engineering work data. This is until calendar week 21, so a little bit further than we are today. And the development of the structural engineering data. We see a little drop. We explained this last week or the week before. This is connected to the and again, we are in the DACH region. So this is connected to the Easter holiday period in 2019. And but main thing is that if we look on the trend line, if we imagine a trend line, we see that this is pretty stable compared to this year.
Yeah. Let's go then in more detail on what this actually entails, right? Exactly.
This should be these are basically the same numbers we saw before for 2019. So this is just comparison of the different segments. So we have office buildings, for example, or hotel industry, or the health sector in this slide and in this data. For the civil engineering, we have segments like streets, tracks, pathways, etc. We compare. So this pretty much fits what you just explained when walking through the city.
Yeah.
How often do you walk through the city, by the way, at the moment? Not so often as expected.
Not so often, but the biking, you get to see a lot of roadworks. But it's Munich on the other hand,
Okay.
so this is
Yeah.
normal.
Okay. If you have any questions on these slides, if you're going through these slides too fast, or if you have a specific question, you can write us today in the channel, or of course you can write an email to us. I will provide the email later. For now, we are good in the time. Yes, 10 minutes left, and we are at the worldwide construction data. This is something also a customer request or listeners request, I have to say. And what do we see here? This is data for Asia, slightly different data to from 2 weeks from last week. But what we again see here is significant drop in the data for the data for early stage information for this year, for 2020, from up to calendar week 8. And we see that we are at the moment are below the level of 2019. And this is pretty interesting, because what we have to consider here is, and this is not our main market, this is Asia, and the other markets we will see in a moment is not our main focus market where we started. This is a new market for us. So, and this is also explained why we're on a lower level with the numbers. But so
I can
I missed
add
the
here
word,
as
but
well when it comes to the data, really, when we're looking internationally, is that, of course, we're comparing the 2 years. It's more interesting, I would say, at this time to look at what is the actual yearly development, because then we can see these drops and stuff. When it comes to looking at some of the international regions like Asia in this case, of course, we are collecting the data, definitely. However, we're constantly improving on those markets when it comes to our actual lead sources, which means throughout time there will be more lead sources, which will also result in more projects. So I wouldn't take this as an absolute and say like, hey, look,
no.
at calendar week 18 we're at the exactly same numbers, or more or less at the same numbers as we were in 2019, but rather really look at the stability of 2019 projects versus the drops and instability of 2020.
Exactly. So what we're looking at is this is mainly English-speaking sources, and yeah, so perfectly explained, Nina. Again, for another comparison of 2019 and 2020 data would be Australia, New Zealand, and the whole region. And this is also pretty interesting, because we again see the Corona effect, but as you can see, we also see a sharp increase of the data for 2020. I roughly remember the media coverage in Australia. I think the lockdown started a little bit later in Australia. This is also what we would see here. But this would be pretty interesting to look more into detail what in Australia, New Zealand, etc.
And also, I mean, when we look at those regions, we know they didn't have such an extreme lockdown like we had in many other countries. So this recovery would be really interesting to see in the future, if we might even go over the numbers that we were having in, for an example, calendar week 1 to 3 or similar.
Yeah. So, Nina, do you have any questions on these slides? Or we can go ahead.
For me, I keep being interested every week, and I think I mentioned that constantly, is how are things gonna go further from here, right? We talked also about, hey, we're seeing different regions having kind of a lag behind certain other regions, and this is exactly what we're continuing to confirm from week to week. So this is what I really get interested. Every week we pull this data and we look at what we assumed the week before and what's actually happening, and it's starting to look like we're really getting a hold of this.
Yeah. Cool. So what we see here is a comparison of Middle East and North Africa states. And again, we see a clear corona effect and a slight recovery. But I think what's mainly interesting is that we saw this little increase in the data in 2019, and it really makes interested what will happen the next weeks, also in these countries with the construction data coverage.
Yeah, definitely. And here again, keep in mind the absolute numbers are maybe not as important, taking into account our data coverage versus the actual drops versus recoveries, which is what we're looking at here, 2020 versus 2019.
Exactly. This is again, and what we see here in the development is we see the same development from the start of the year until calendar week 4. We have this, more or less little decrease, and this little increase, this is higher in 2020. But again, at the same time, we see an increase, at the same time, we see a decrease, but we do not see this corona effect in 2019. So this is the big difference, and this is why we interpret this as a corona effect. By the way, last week, I remember we showed a segment for data. We see the only positive corona effect. If you remember that, this was the hospital sector for DACH region. And so we do not only have a negative corona effect, we call this corona effect, but to be technically correct, we would have to call this a negative corona effect, because we saw a positive corona effect for the hospital sector last week.
Yeah, definitely. And this is again something, if you're seeing that specific things are more interesting to you, what we also wanted to do this week was take a bit of a different look at the data, and then we're happy to also go back into different segments next week and look again at that recovery on hospitality, on hospitals, on kindergarten, schools. I think this is something we were looking at as well. And this is where we can really make some different types of comparisons. So if this is of interest, feel free to also give us a thumbs up or something similar.
Yes. So what's last? The summary is last. A short summary from my side on the information we saw on slide 5 and 6. So there was this plus of 80% and 37% for the construction data in Europe and DACH since the lowest point in calendar week 15. On slide 9, we saw we compared the DACH data with the United States data, and we saw that the DACH data decreased for almost 50% to a pre-crisis level of 51%, and that we only saw a decrease of 40% to a pre-crisis level of almost 60% in the US. And the same calculation for the comparison of structural engineering works and civil engineering works on slide 11. Again, this would be Hochbau and Tiefbau in German. And here we saw a major difference in the decrease. We still are on the level of 65% compared to the pre-crisis status in the civil engineering. So civil engineering sector is much more stable for DACH than the structural engineering sector. Yeah, that would be from my side.
Awesome, thanks a lot. I will check quickly if we have any questions here or anything else that we can cover, but it seems like we're good. Basically, yeah, this week slightly different than last week, but we're seeing some recoveries which we were anticipating in the last couple of weeks, which is definitely positive information. Feel free, as always, to reach out to us, add us on LinkedIn, write us an email if there is anything you would like us to discuss next week. And of course, thanks a lot to everybody who attended, who gave us those 30 minutes this week to sit through this whole data analysis with us. And we really look forward to welcoming you next week again.
Exactly. And if you have any questions, please write me an email. And please always consider this is our collected data. We do not say this is a whole market lookout or coverage. These are just indicators for the market. I see we have a question, right? Or is this No. Okay.
Okay, we're all good. Perfect. Then thanks a lot
Good.
to everybody. Have a great rest of your Thursday and Friday and a weekend, and we hope to see you next week.
Goodbye, everybody. Bye, Nina.
Bye.